Just last year, National Public Radio aired a program in which they said bats, direct quote, bats are arguably one of the most dangerous animals in the world. And get this, so when there are bats in the sky, there could be Ebola in the poop that lands on your shoulder. Never even mentioning that you can't get Ebola in the United States and that there is no evidence, no proof that Ebola ever came from bats to begin with, and never a case in world history in which somebody got a serious disease from a bat pooping on them. So we have here in Texas the perfect answer to that claim, which is basically just wild speculation to raise scare money. When hundreds of thousands of bats began moving into newly created crevices under the Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin in the early 1980s, media had a heyday. Public health officials said that the bats were mostly rabid, dangerous, would attack people, made newspaper headlines nationally and around the world, claiming that hundreds of thousands of rabid bats were invading and attacking the citizens of Austin. This is the kind of conditions I found there. This is how people felt about bats arriving in Austin. I decided, and what's really interesting looking back is how often just a single scientist who takes even a small amount of time to communicate with the public can change the whole course of further events. I decided that those bats, any city that had that many bats and that many news media with nothing better to do than talk about them, would be the perfect location to center my conservation education campaign. I point out that bats only bite in self-defense if grabbed by a human, by a careless human. They do not attack people, and they pose no threat to the people of Austin. And my promises have been borne out. 35 years later, we're still waiting for the first person to be attacked. We're still waiting for the first person to contract a disease from one of our bats. But what have we learned? Our bats are eating literally tons of crop and yard pests every night. They're bringing in 10 million tourist dollars every summer. And Austin has become the world's center for educating people to a better appreciation of living in harmony with nature and the advantages of doing so, including with such misunderstood creatures as bats. Now, what are the alternatives to learning to live in harmony with nature? We hear a lot about pesticides and not nearly enough about how dangerous they are. Back in 1942, when we first introduced pesticides in agriculture in America, within 10 years, crop losses to pests, insect pests, rose by almost double. That's quite a commentary on the value of pesticides. And now we hear about the pesticide treadmill, which has been coined by entomologists with regard to the fact that the pesticides kill the pest controllers, the natural controllers of insect pests, far faster than they control the pests. And I set about not long ago to discover just what impact that was having. I'd go to CDC's website, World Health, and it almost sounded like they were like adding vitamins to the world. But I dug a little further and went to the scientific literature on Google Scholar, found multiple review studies. This one cites 480 studies, and what did they conclude? There's a huge body of evidence on the relationship between exposure to pesticides and elevated rate of chronic diseases such as cancer, diabetes, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, birth defects, and reproductive disorders. Chronic diseases are the most important global health problems. It is time to find a preventive approach logically by reducing pesticide use. And yet, what do we hear about in the media? We're all about to die of a pandemic caused by bats, when in fact bats have never been known to cause a major pandemic in world history. Even SARS, which was a minor pandemic, still, despite millions of dollars worth of research, can't be laid at the feet of bats. Ebola, you've all heard, comes from bats, and yet there's still not a shred of scientifically credible proof that Ebola came from bats. While we're spending billions of dollars looking for potentially dangerous viruses in bats that might someday, but never have, pose significant threat to people, we're being diverted our attention to those things instead of paying attention to things like this that are really killing us right here at home. So, let's say you've decided you'd like to have a career in studying bats. How would you go about learning to study bats? Well, there are workshops and training opportunities every year. We offer them. Last spring, these citizen scientists, we call them, joined us in Cocobolo Nature Reserve in Panama to document the importance and needs of bats there. This young man in the green t-shirt is not a trained biologist. He's never had a course in biology in his entire life. He's a top executive from a major food manufacturing company, but he loves bats. And on his own, he has learned so much about bats that he probably knows more than most of my colleagues with PhDs in bat biology. And he now helps us teach other people how to study bats. You don't necessarily have to even become a scientist to be a part of improving the world around us and helping with conservation and knowledge of things like bats.